My name is Carol Thompson, I'm 67 years old, and my own son tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my life savings. Before I tell you about the moment I turned his own evil plan against him, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The crystal wine glass felt cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the hot rage simmering just beneath my skin. Across the mahogany dining table, my son Kevin raised his own glass, a wide, practiced smile plastered on his face. He looked every bit the successful son, handsome, charming, the man I had poured my entire life into raising after his father, my dear Robert, passed away. To my mother, Kevin announced, his voice smooth as silk, the most generous and loving woman I know. Happy birthday to me, and thank you, Mom, for everything. His wife, Sarah, seated beside him, beamed, her eyes sparkling with what anyone else would have called adoration. But I knew better. I saw the greed flickering behind that polished facade. I saw the lie in my son's smile. Because I knew that in the other identical wine glass on the table, the one intended for me, a potent sedative was likely dissolving, a chemical concoction meant to turn me into a confused, pliable old woman ready to sign away her entire $2.5 million inheritance. As I looked at him, preparing to toast to his own treachery, my mind flashed back to that sweltering August afternoon 4 months earlier. The air in my Miami home was thick and still, the only sound the rhythmic hiss of the sprinklers outside on the lawn. I'd been about to take my usual afternoon nap in the sunroom when I heard their voices drifting in from the patio, low and conspiratorial. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was oblivious. Are you sure this is going to work? Sarah's voice was a nervous whisper. What if she puts up a fight? She won't. Kevin's voice was cold, stripped of all the warmth he used with me. She's getting forgetful anyway. I've been telling people for weeks how she's been slipping. A little push is all she needs. My breath caught in my throat. Slipping. I handled all my own finances, my investments, my life, with the same sharp mind that had helped my Robert build his architectural firm from the ground up. Then came the details, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of my world. A $380,000 debt. Loan sharks in Austin, the ruthless kind who didn't make idle threats. A business venture of his had failed, something he'd conveniently forgotten to mention during our weekly Sunday calls. The deadline to pay was December 15th, just 5 days after his birthday. So the plan is set for my birthday dinner, Kevin continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. You'll pour the wine. I'll make sure she drinks it. Jacob Stone will be here at 9:30 sharp with the paperwork. We'll tell her it's just some routine documents for her estate planning, to make things easier for me to manage as she gets older. Jacob Stone. The name sounded vaguely official, but my blood ran cold. He wasn't my lawyer. My lawyer was David Chan, a man Robert and I had trusted for 30 years. And she'll just sign everything over? Sarah asked. Her house, the investment portfolio, everything? She'll be so groggy she'd sign her own death warrant, Kevin scoffed. She trusts me completely. She'll do anything for her only son. Then he paused, and what he said next was the single most painful thing I have ever heard in my 67 years of life. Don't worry. The demented old woman won't know what hit her. Demented. The word hung in the humid air, sucking all the oxygen from my lungs. My hand, resting on the arm of my wicker chair, gripped the frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just the plan to steal my money, my home, the legacy Robert and I had built with our own 2 hands. It was the contempt, the absolute soul-crushing disdain from the one person I loved more than life itself. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered into a million ice-cold pieces. The love, the boundless, unconditional love I had for my son, evaporated, replaced by a chilling, quiet resolve. He had just declared war. And he had no idea his demented old woman had heard every single word. And now here we were. For months later. The stage was set. The actors were in place. Kevin's smiling face was waiting, his glass held high. He was toasting the mother he was about to destroy. I looked from his face to the 2 glasses of deep, red Merlot on the silver tray between us. One was for him. One was for the trap he had set. He had no idea the prey had become the hunter. The woman who had loved him unconditionally was gone. In her place stood someone he had never met before. I took a slow, deliberate breath, met his smiling eyes across the table, And I began to speak. The morning after I heard my son plot my ruin, the Florida sun rose with its usual cheerful indifference. The world outside my window looked exactly the same, but my world had been burned to the ground. There were no tears. Tears felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, there was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. Grief would come later. Today was for strategy. I didn't reach for the phone to call Kevin and scream at him. I didn't call Sarah to accuse her. That's what they expected the demented old woman to do. Fly into a rage, get hysterical, and prove their narrative for them. No. I walked to my home office, the one Robert had designed with beautiful cherrywood bookshelves, and sat down at his old desk. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up the phone. My first call wasn't to a friend. It was to my lawyer. "David Chun, please," I said to his receptionist, my voice calm and even. When David came on the line, his voice was as warm and familiar as it had been for 30 years. "Carol, so good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "David," I said, getting straight to the point, "I need your help. It's about Kevin. And I need absolute discretion." The warmth in his voice was replaced by professional concern. "Of course, Carol. What's wrong?" I told him everything. I recounted the conversation I'd overheard on the patio, word for damning word. The debt. The loan sharks. The plan to drug me. The fake lawyer. The demented old woman. I spoke without emotion, like I was reading a grocery list. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Finally, David sighed. It was a sound heavy with disappointment and anger on my behalf. "Carol, I am so sorry. I have no words." "I don't need words, David," I replied. "I need a plan. I need to protect myself. I need to protect everything Robert and I built." "You've come to the right place," he said, his voice now sharp and focused. "The first thing we need is information. Hard, undeniable proof. I know a man. His name is Marcus Thorne. He's a private investigator, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes. He's the best there is. And he's as discreet as a priest in a confessional. Can you meet with him tomorrow?" "I can meet him in an hour," I said. The next day, I found myself in a nondescript office building in Brickell, Miami's financial district. Marcus Thorne's office didn't have his name on the door, just a suite number. He was a man in his late 50s with watchful eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He just listened, his pen scratching quietly on a legal pad as I repeated my story. When I was done, he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice a low baritone. "In my line of work, I've learned one thing. When people are desperate for money, they get sloppy. They leave a trail. My job is to find it. I'll start with your son's financials, his known associates, and this Jacob Stone." Over the next week, I lived in a strange state of limbo. I kept up appearances, answering Kevin's calls, listening to his cheerful lies about work and life. Each "I love you, Mom" felt like a twist of the knife. I felt like a spy in my own life. While I waited for Marcus to call, I found myself wandering through my house, touching the things Robert and I had collected over a lifetime. His favorite leather armchair. The photos on the wall. Our life. It was during one of these walks that I noticed it. On the marble mantelpiece above the fireplace, there was an empty space. A space where Robert's vintage Patek Philippe watch had always sat. It was his most prized possession, a gift from his father. It wasn't just valuable. It was a piece of him. My heart started to pound. I searched the house, my movements growing more frantic. The study. Our bedroom. The safe. It was gone. My hands were shaking when I called Marcus. "The watch," I stammered. "My husband's watch is gone." "Describe it to me, Carol," he said, his voice calm, pulling me back from the edge of panic. I did. He was silent for a moment. "I'll look into it," he said. 2 days later, he called me back. "Carol, I need you to sit down." I sank into the nearest chair. I found the watch. Or rather, I found where it went. An online auction site. It was sold 6 months ago. "Sold," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "For $20,000, Marcus continued. The seller's account was linked to a bank account in Austin, Texas. An account belonging to Kevin Thompson. The phone felt heavy in my hand. He hadn't just plotted to steal my future. He had already started selling off my past. He had sold a piece of his own father's memory to fund his gambling addiction. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. This was no longer just about protecting my inheritance. This was about justice for Robert too. "Carol, are you there?" Marcus's voice broke through my haze. "I'm here," I said, my own voice sounding distant. "Good," he said. "Because this is just the beginning. The financial records I've pulled are extensive. This isn't just a son in trouble, Mrs. Thompson. What I'm looking at here is a detailed map of your son's complete and utter self-destruction. And he was planning on taking you down with him." The following afternoon, I was back in Marcus Thorne's office. The blinds were drawn against the bright Miami sun, casting the room in a somber, serious light. On the polished conference table between us lay a thick, 3-ring binder. It was black, clinical, and it contained the anatomy of my son's betrayal. "I wanted you to see this in person," Marcus said, tapping the binder. "Because hearing it is one thing. Seeing it is another." He opened it to the first section, labeled Financials. It was a stack of bank and credit card statements going back 2 years. He had highlighted line after line. The names were a blur of online casinos and sports betting websites I'd never heard of. William Hill, Bet365. Names that meant nothing to me but had clearly consumed my son's life. "It started small," Marcus explained, tracing a finger along a column of figures. "A few $100s here and there. Standard stuff. But look at the progression." He flipped through the pages. The numbers escalated at an alarming rate. By last year, Kevin was losing thousands of dollars a week. In the last 18 months, I can track over $300,000 in gambling losses alone. I felt a wave of nausea. The money I'd given him to start his import business. The savings he and Sarah were supposed to have for their future. All of it gone. Poured into a digital void. But where did he get the money? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't have that kind of cash. Marcus flipped to the next section. Loans and liabilities. My eyes fell on the first document. It was a mortgage agreement. My heart stopped. It was for the condo in South Beach. The beautiful ocean view apartment Robert and I had bought for them as a wedding gift, paid for in full. There, in stark black and white, was the evidence. Kevin and Sarah had taken out a second mortgage on it 8 months ago for $150,000. They used the property you gave them as collateral, Marcus said gently. And when that ran out, he slid another set of papers across the table. They were applications for personal loans. 3 of them totaling $80,000. I stared at the signature line on the bottom of each application. It was my name. A clumsy but passable forgery of my signature. He had used my good credit, my name, to dig himself deeper into his hole. He had committed fraud against his own mother. I was floored. It felt like a punch to the gut. He didn't just lie to me, he used me. He used my identity. But the worst was yet to come. The next section was labeled, The Austin Connection. Marcus pressed a button on a small digital recorder. I had a source pull the audio from a wiretap related to an ongoing investigation into this loan sharking ring. This is legal, Carol. And you need to hear it. He pressed play. A man's voice, gravelly and thick with a menacing drawl, filled the room. Time's up, Thompson. You got till the 15th. Not a day later. Then I heard Kevin's voice, and it was a sound I'll never forget. It was thin, reedy, and trembling with pure terror. Please just give me a few more weeks. I'm getting the money. My mother. She has an inheritance. A large one. Your mother, the man sneered. We ain't a bank. We don't do extensions. You and that pretty wife of yours. You know what happens to people who don't pay. We make examples of them. Don't make me make an example of you. The click of the call ending echoed in the silent office. He had offered me up to them. He had put a target on my back, and on Sarah's to save his own skin. Finally, Marcus turned to the last section. Jacob Stone. The file was thin. It contained a printout from the Texas State Bar Association website. There was his picture. A man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. And below it, in bold red letters, disbarred. Convicted of felony fraud and exploitation of the elderly. He's a predator, Carol, Marcus said. His license was revoked 3 years ago after he was caught draining the bank accounts of half a dozen seniors in a Houston retirement community. He preys on the vulnerable. He was the perfect tool for your son's plan. I closed my eyes, the evidence swirling in my head. The gambling. The stolen watch. The forged signatures. The death threats. The disbarred lawyer. It wasn't just a desperate son making a mistake. This was a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy to strip me of everything I had. This was a man who had looked at his own mother and saw nothing but a solution to his problems. I opened my eyes and looked at Marcus. The fog of shock was finally clearing, replaced by a diamond-hard certainty. They think I'm a confused old woman, I said, my voice low and steady. They think I'm weak. They're about to find out just how wrong they are. I pointed to the digital recorder. I'm going to need a way to record them in my house, I stated. And I'm going to need more than just recordings. I need to turn my home into a stage, Marcus. A stage where my son and his wife will give the performance of their lives. And I'll be sitting in the front row, directing every scene. The weight of my secret was immense. I felt utterly alone, navigating a nightmare world where the person I should have been able to lean on was the very monster I was fighting. I needed to tell someone. Not a lawyer, not an investigator, but a friend. I needed an ally. My best friend, Eleanor Vance, had lived 2 houses down from me for 40 years. We had raised our children together, celebrated holidays, and mourned the loss of our husbands together. She was a fiery, no-nonsense woman with a core of steel and a heart of gold. I called her that evening. Eleanor, I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. Can you come over? I need to talk to you about something important. She was at my door in 5 minutes, a worried look on her face. We sat in my sunroom, the same room where I'd first overheard the plot. With the doors firmly closed, I told her everything. I laid out the whole sordid story, from Kevin's chilling words on the patio to the horrifying details Marcus had uncovered. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief, and finally to a quiet, simmering fury. When I finished, she didn't offer empty reassurances. She reached across the small table and took my hand, her grip firm and strong. That ungrateful little. She bit off the word. Carol, I am so sorry. To think that boy, the one I used to give cookies to after school, could do this. She shook her head, her eyes flashing. Well, he has no idea who he's messing with. We are not going to let him get away with this. What's the plan? Just having her there, believing me without question, filled me with a strength I hadn't realized I was missing. We were a team now. A few days later, my newfound strength was put to the test. My phone rang and it was Eleanor. Her voice was different, tight and angry. Carol, you need to hear this, she said without any preamble. I just got off the phone with Martha Jennings from our old book club. We were just catching up and she asked how you were doing. She said she was worried about you. Worried about me? Why? I asked, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. Because, Eleanor's voice dripped with sarcasm, Sarah told her a few weeks ago that your memory has really started to go. Martha said Sarah sounded so concerned, telling her how you've been forgetting appointments, misplacing things, even getting confused about what day it is. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, the receiver cold against my ear. It was one thing to hear them plotted in secret. It was another thing entirely to know they were actively, methodically poisoning my reputation among my friends. They weren't just planning a crime. They were crafting a narrative. They were laying the groundwork, building a foundation of lies so that when the time came, everyone would nod and say, "Oh, poor Carol, it was bound to happen." It's a blessing Kevin was there to take over her affairs. It was a level of premeditated cruelty that was almost impossible to comprehend. It was gaslighting of the most vicious kind. She told Martha, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling with rage, that she and Kevin were looking into options to help you manage things, because you were becoming a danger to yourself. A hot flash crawled up my neck. A danger to myself. They were trying to paint me as incompetent, as a senile old woman who needed to be saved from herself, all to justify their theft. They were trying to steal not just my money, but my credibility, my dignity, my very identity as a capable, intelligent woman. That night, Marcus's team came to the house while I was out having a book club dinner with Eleanor, our alibi. They were professionals moving quickly and silently. They installed state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. A camera hidden in a smoke detector in the dining room, another in a bookshelf in the living room, and microphones tucked away in a floral arrangement and behind a picture frame. The whole system could be monitored from my phone. When I came home, the house was exactly as I had left it, but it was no longer just my home. It was a listening post. It was a theater of war. The next day, Kevin called. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How are you feeling?" I took a deep breath. The performance had begun. "Oh, a little tired, dear," I said, putting a slight quaver in my voice. "I seem to be misplacing my keys all the time lately. It's so frustrating." There was a brief pause on his end. "Don't worry about it, Mom," he said, his voice oozing with false sympathy. "It happens to everyone. That's what I'm here for, to help you out. You can imagine, can't you? My own son, my daughter-in-law, the people I loved and trusted most, were systematically trying to convince the world, and maybe even me, that I was losing my mind. If you've ever had someone in your life, a spouse, a sibling, a child, twist reality and make you question your own sanity, then you need to keep watching. Because this was the moment I stopped being a victim of their lies and started using those very same lies as the building blocks for their downfall. The trap was now set, and they were about to walk right into it. With my home now wired for sound and video, the next phase of my counteroffensive began. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about making sure that even if their plan somehow succeeded, they would get nothing. It was time to build a fortress. I met with David Chen again, this time with a new, harder edge to my determination. I laid out the evidence from Marcus, including the gaslighting campaign Sarah was waging against me. David's face, usually so calm and composed, was a mask of cold anger. "This is beyond a simple case of fraud, Carol," he said, his fingers steepled under his chin. "This is a coordinated psychological assault. We're going to build a legal wall around you so high and so thick that they couldn't get through it with a battering ram." He called our new strategy Operation Phoenix, because we were going to let my old life, the one where I was a trusting mother, burn to the ground, so that a new, stronger one could rise from the ashes. The first step was to protect my assets. David explained that simply rewriting my will wasn't enough. If they succeeded in getting my signature while I was drugged, those documents could potentially supersede my will, leading to a protracted legal battle over my intent. We needed something more robust, something ironclad. "We are going to move the vast majority of your estate into an irrevocable trust," David explained, pulling a stack of legal documents from his briefcase. "Once you place assets into this type of trust, you legally no longer own them. The trust owns them. You can be the trustee, the manager, but you are not the owner. This makes any attempt to transfer ownership from you personally null and void." The idea was brilliant. For the next week, we worked tirelessly. We retitled my house, my stocks, my investment portfolio, everything, placing it all under the ownership of a newly created entity. We called it the Robert Thompson Legacy Trust. We wrote the trust charter with meticulous care. Its stated purpose was twofold. First, to provide for my care and well-being for the rest of my life, and second, upon my passing, to fund a foundation providing college scholarships for aspiring architecture students, a tribute to the profession my Robert had loved so dearly. My entire inheritance was now legally earmarked for charity. "Now," David said with a grim smile as I signed the final document, "if Kevin tries to get you to sign over your assets, he's not just committing fraud against his mother. He's attempting to steal from a charitable foundation. The penalties for that are exponentially more severe. He's not just facing a family dispute, he's facing federal charges." The second step was to bring in law enforcement. Marcus arranged a discreet meeting for me with a detective in the Miami Police Department's Economic Crimes Unit. Her name was Maria Rodriguez. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. We met in a private room at the back of a quiet restaurant. I told her the whole story, and Marcus presented a summary of his findings: the bank records, the forged loan applications, the file on the disbarred lawyer Jacob Stone. Detective Rodriguez listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. "Mrs. Thompson," she said when I had finished, "what your son is planning goes far beyond a family matter. We have conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and attempted illegal administration of a controlled substance. With the loan shark angle, we could even be looking at RICO-level charges down the line. She agreed to get involved, but she had one critical condition. For this to be an open and shut case, she explained, her gaze steady and serious, we need to catch them in the act. Red-handed. That means on the night of December 10th, you have to let them play out their entire hand. You have to let them drug the wine. You have to let the fake lawyer present the documents. We need them to make the overt act of trying to get your signature. My team will be outside in unmarked cars. We'll have a live feed from the cameras you've installed. We will not let them harm you. But you have to go through with it. Can you do that? My heart hammered against my ribs. It was one thing to plan this from the safety of a lawyer's office. It was another to know I would have to sit at a table with my own son, watch him prepare to poison me, and act the part of the frail, confused victim. I would have to face them alone, knowing that a team of police officers was just feet away, waiting for my signal. I thought of Robert. I thought of the life we built. I thought of the contempt in my son's voice when he called me that horrible name. Yes, I said, my voice clear and firm. I can do that. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. The trap was no longer just a legal one. It was now a criminal sting operation. And I was the bait. The next step in Operation Phoenix was the most emotionally wrenching task I have ever undertaken. It was time to officially sever the final tie to the son I thought I knew. It was time to rewrite my will and my family trust. I sat with David Chun in his quiet, book-lined office, the scent of old paper and leather filling the air. He had the documents spread out before me. For 38 years since the day Kevin was born, his name was the only one that mattered in those papers. He was the sole beneficiary of everything Robert and I had ever worked for. Carol, are you absolutely certain? David asked gently, his pen hovering over the page. Once we do this, it's done. Legally, it will be as if he was never your heir. I thought of the stolen watch. I thought of the forged signatures. I thought of the words, demented old woman. A tear I didn't know I'd been holding back slid down my cheek. I wiped it away, not with sadness but with anger. The son I was leaving this to wouldn't drug his own mother, David, I said, my voice thick with emotion but firm in its conviction. The man who is planning to rob me is a stranger. A stranger who happens to have my last name. Yes, I'm sure. Take his name off everything. We spent the next hour restructuring my final wishes. The 10% of my assets that remained outside the charitable trust were now redirected. A portion would go to Eleanor, my steadfast friend. The rest would be donated to a national organization that provided support and counseling to families affected by gambling addiction. It was a final bitter irony. The very legacy Kevin was trying to steal would now be used to help people ruined by the same disease that had destroyed him. With the legal and financial walls built, all that was left was the performance. My performance. I had to be convincing. I couldn't overplay my hand and make them suspicious, but I had to appear vulnerable enough for them to believe their plan was working. I began my research. I spent hours online, reading articles from medical journals and watching videos of interviews with neurologists about the early subtle signs of dementia. I practiced in front of the mirror. I learned to let my train of thought drift off mid-sentence. I practiced a slight tremor in my hand when I reached for a glass. I rehearsed looking at a familiar object with a flicker of confusion in my eyes. I was becoming an actress in the most tragic play of my life. In late November, with just a couple of weeks to go, I decided we needed a dress rehearsal. I called Kevin and Sarah. I was thinking, I said, injecting a note of lonely wistfulness into my voice. We haven't had a nice family dinner, just the three of us, in ages. Could you come over this Sunday? Of course, Mom, Kevin said instantly. We'd love to. That Sunday evening was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I cooked Robert's favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. I watched them from the corner of my eye, analyzing their every move. Kevin was jumpy, constantly glancing at his phone under the table. Sarah was a nervous wreck. She was overly effusive, complimenting my cooking, my dress, the flowers on the table, her voice a little too high-pitched. She dropped her fork twice, her hands trembling slightly. The guilt was eating her alive, but clearly not enough to make her stop. During the meal, I accidentally called Kevin by his father's name. Robert, dear, could you pass the salt? He froze for a second, exchanging a quick, significant look with Sarah. It's Kevin, Mom, he said gently, a look of pitying concern on his face that made me want to scream. Oh, of course, dear, I said, fluttering my hand dismissively. Silly me. My mind is all over the place today. Later, as we were having dessert, Kevin leaned forward, his expression earnest. You know, Mom, he said, I'm really looking forward to my birthday. It's going to be so special. Just having a quiet celebration at home with you. Just like when I was a kid. The audacity of it nearly took my breath away. He was invoking cherished childhood memories as a smokescreen for his vile plan. He was using our shared past as a weapon against me. I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep my composure. I managed a weak smile. Me too, my love, I said, my voice soft. I'll make sure it's a night you'll never forget. He and Sarah had no idea how true that statement was. They left that night convinced I was a fragile, deteriorating old woman, a plum ripe for the picking. They didn't see the woman who went straight to her office after they left, pulled up the footage from the hidden cameras on her phone, and rewatched their nervous tics and exchanged glances with the cold, detached eye of a general studying her enemy before the final battle. The dress rehearsal was over. It was time for opening night. The morning of December 10th dawned gray and overcast, the Miami sky mirroring the storm brewing inside my home. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. At 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a single sentence. Operation Phoenix is a go. All assets are in position. It was the confirmation from Detective Rodriguez. The police were in place. There was no turning back now. I spent the day moving through a fog of adrenaline and icy calm. I went through the motions of a normal day to avoid raising any suspicion. I did the crossword puzzle in the morning paper. I paid a few bills online. I even had a long, cheerful phone call with my sister in California, talking about plans for Christmas, a holiday I knew would never be the same again. Every mundane act felt monumental, like the last rites of a life that was about to end to make way for a new one. By 5 p.m. it was time to set the stage. I went into the dining room. I polished the silverware, Robert's wedding gift to me, until it gleamed. I set out my best china. Then I went to the kitchen. From the wine rack, I selected a bottle of the expensive Merlot that Kevin knew was his father's favorite. Then came the most critical part of the preparations. I took out 2 identical Baccarat crystal wine glasses, the ones Robert and I only ever use for special anniversaries. I placed them on a silver tray. The glass on the right was mine. It would remain pure. The glass on the left was the decoy, the trap. It sat there sparkling under the kitchen lights, an empty vessel waiting to be filled with poison. The placement was everything. I am right-handed. I always place my glass to my right. It was a small subconscious habit I was counting on them not noticing in their nervous excitement. At precisely 8 p.m. the doorbell rang. I took one last deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and walked to the door, a serene smile fixed on my face. There they stood, my son and his wife. Kevin was holding a ridiculously expensive bottle of Dom Perignon, the picture of a doting son celebrating his birthday. Sarah held a large bouquet of red roses, her smile a little too bright, a little too brittle. They were symbols of celebration, twisted into props for their dark little play. Happy birthday, Mom, Kevin boomed, pulling me into a hug. His arms felt alien around me. It was the hug of a stranger. Can you believe it? 38 years old. The time flies, my dear, I said, patting his back while my heart felt like a block of ice. Dinner was a masterclass in deception. I played my part to perfection. I let my sentences trail off. I asked Kevin about his import business, feigning confusion when he gave me a vague answer. I saw the look they shared across the table, a look of smug certainty. They thought I was completely out of it. They believed they were in total control. I, in turn, watched them with the precision of a hawk. I saw the way Kevin's knee jiggled under the table. I saw the beads of sweat on Sarah's upper lip, even though the air conditioning was on. They were predators, yes, but they were nervous predators. And nervous predators make mistakes. At 9:15, right on schedule, Kevin made his move. Mom, he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. This has been a wonderful dinner. You know what would make it perfect? A glass of Dad's special Merlot. I think my birthday deserves the best. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. It was time. What a wonderful idea, Kevin, I said, my voice full of warmth. I was saving it for a special occasion, and this is certainly it. I stood up and headed for the kitchen. As I expected, Sarah quickly rose from her chair. "Let me help you with that, Carol," she said, her voice bright and helpful. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The kitchen lights felt unnaturally bright, like a stage spotlight. Every sound was magnified. The clink of the wine opener, the soft pop of the cork, the gurgle of the deep red liquid pouring into the 2 crystal glasses. Sarah hovered nearby, a picture of false helpfulness, her eyes darting around the room. I could practically feel the nervous energy radiating from her. I filled both glasses to the exact same level. As I turned to put the corkscrew in the drawer, I watched her out of the corner of my eye. This was the moment. Her movements were swift and furtive. Her hand dove into her designer handbag, emerging with a small folded piece of paper. With her back partially to me, she quickly unfolded it and tipped the fine white powder into the glass on the left side of the silver tray. The powder dissolved instantly, leaving no trace, no scent. Just as Kevin had said it would. She stuffed the empty paper back into her purse just as I turned back around. "Is there anything else I can get, Carol?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "No, thank you, Sarah dear," I said, my voice laden with a double meaning only I could understand. "I have everything under control." I picked up the silver tray. My hands were rock steady. My heart was beating a slow, powerful rhythm, like a war drum. I walked back into the dining room, a gracious hostess carrying 2 glasses of wine, one of which contained enough sedatives to incapacitate a grown man. I approached the table where Kevin was sitting, his face alight with greedy anticipation. He was looking at the glass on the right, my usual spot. He thought he knew which glass was his. This was my moment, the culmination of 4 months of planning, of pain, of silent rage. I couldn't just swap the glasses. That might look clumsy, suspicious. I needed to make him take the poison glass willingly. I needed to use his own arrogance against him. I stopped beside his chair. Instead of placing the tray on the table, I held it up. I looked at the glass on the left, the one Sarah had just drugged. Then I looked at Kevin, my eyes filling with manufactured tears of maternal pride and nostalgia. "Kevin, my dear boy," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Look at this glass." I gestured to the poison chalice. "This was your father's favorite. He always drank from this one on special occasions. He said it just felt right in his hand." Kevin's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He was confused. This wasn't part of his script. I pressed on, my voice thick with feigned sentimentality. "On your 38th birthday, I think he would want you to have it. As a toast. From him through me." I saw the conflict in his eyes. His plan was to drug me. He couldn't risk drinking from the wrong glass. But how could he refuse? How could the loving, doting son refuse such a heartfelt, symbolic gesture in front of his wife? To do so would be to admit something was wrong. His own vanity, his need to maintain his facade, had trapped him. He hesitated for only a second. "Of course, Mom," he said, his voice a little strained. That's incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." He reached out and took the glass on the left. He took the poison glass. I watched his fingers close around the stem, and in that moment, I felt a surge of cold, triumphant victory. I placed the tray on the table and picked up my own clean glass from the right side. I turned to face him, my expression one of pure maternal love. I raised my glass high. "To my son Kevin," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "May you get everything you truly deserve in this life." "To my mother," he echoed, the irony completely lost on him. "The most trusting woman I know." We clinked our glasses together. The pure, clear ring of the baccarat crystal filled the air. Then we both drank. I savored the rich, oaky flavor of the Merlot, while my son, my only child, swallowed the bait, the hook, and the line. He had just drugged himself with the very tools of his betrayal. The checkmate was a thing of beauty. The next 20 minutes were a masterwork of theater. I began my performance, letting my speech become slightly slurred, my movements a little slower. I'd occasionally blink slowly, as if fighting to keep my eyes open. Across the table, a real-life drama was unfolding. The sedatives worked faster than Kevin had anticipated. I saw the first signs within 10 minutes. His confident posture began to slump. His speech, when he tried to engage me in small talk, was noticeably thick. He tried to hide it, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it, but the drug was already taking hold. The hunter was becoming disoriented, trapped in his own snare. At 9:30 p.m., right on cue, the doorbell rang. Sarah, looking pale and nervous, hurried to answer it. She returned with Jacob Stone, the disgraced lawyer. He was a thin man with shifty eyes and a cheap suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He reeked of desperation. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his smile oily and insincere. "I'm Jacob Stone, the notary your son has engaged to help with some urgent estate matters." "Oh yes," I murmured, pretending to struggle to focus on his face. "Kevin mentioned something. Paperwork." Kevin pushed himself up from his chair, swaying slightly. The irony was almost comical. He was trying to orchestrate a multi-million-dollar fraud, while fighting off the effects of a powerful sedative. "It's just some formalities, Mom," he slurred, gesturing vaguely towards the document Stone was spreading across the dining table. To make things easier." Stone laid out the documents with a flourish. They were thick and official-looking. I could see the headings even from where I sat. Irrevocable transfer of title. General power of attorney. It was a complete and total liquidation of my life. "You see, Mrs. Thompson," Stone began his practice speech, "given your advancing age and some recent episodes of mental confusion that your son has shared with me, it's prudent to transfer the management of your considerable assets to a younger, more capable party." I feigned a look of alarm, turning to my son. "Mental confusion? Kevin, what is he talking about?" Kevin and Sarah exchanged a panicked glance. Their story was unraveling faster than they could control it. "It's nothing, Mom," Kevin said, his words running together. "Last month, you forgot to pay the electric bill. Remember? We're just being proactive." It was a complete lie. My bills were on autopay. Every word they spoke was another nail in their own coffins, all of it being recorded live by the Miami Police Department. "Just sign here, here and here," Stone said, pushing the documents and a heavy, gold-plated pen in front of me. "It will all be over in a minute." This was it. The final move. With a hand that I made to look clumsy and unsteady, I reached for the pen. But instead of grasping it, my hand slipped, knocking over my still half-full glass of wine. The dark red liquid washed over the pristine white documents, blurring the ink, ruining the perfectly laid trap. "Oh my goodness!" I cried out, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a flustered old woman. "I am so terribly sorry. Look what I've done. I'm so clumsy these days." As Stone and Sarah scrambled to salvage the wine-soaked papers, I took my chance. My hand slipped into the pocket of my dress and pressed the small, discreet panic button Marcus had given me. It was the signal. The cavalry was on its way. But I needed one more thing. I needed the confession. I looked at my son, my eyes wide with manufactured fear and confusion. "Kevin, I don't understand," I whimpered. "Why does this say I'm signing over my house? Why is this man saying I have memory problems?" My son, his judgment clouded by the drugs and his plan collapsing around him, made the fatal error I had been waiting for. The desperation broke through his carefully constructed facade. "Just sign it, Mom," he pleaded, his voice cracking loud and desperate. "Listen to me. I'm in serious trouble. I owe dangerous people $400,000. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill Sarah. I need your inheritance to save our lives." It was a direct, unambiguous confession. Recorded. Sarah, realizing what he had just done, spun on him, her face a mask of pure panic. "Kevin, shut up," she shrieked. "You weren't supposed to tell her about the loan sharks. Or the sedatives in her wine." And there it was. Confession number 2. The entire conspiracy, laid bare by their own panicked mouths. Jacob Stone tried to regain control, but it was too late. "Please, let's all just remain calm," he started. But his voice was drowned out by a sound that started as a distant wail and grew rapidly closer. Sirens. Kevin's drug-addled brain finally processed the sound. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying realization. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. Why are the police here? I dropped the act. I sat up straight in my chair, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. Because Kevin, I said, looking directly into the eyes of the monster I had raised. I never drank the poisoned wine. You did. And for the last 5 minutes, you have confessed every detail of your disgusting plan to the hidden cameras and microphones of the Miami Police Department. The look of absolute, soul-shattering horror that washed over my son's face as he finally understood the depth of his miscalculation was a moment of justice so pure, so perfect, it would be seared into my memory forever. The wail of the sirens cut off abruptly, replaced by the slamming of car doors and the heavy tread of footsteps on my front porch. The dining room, which moments before had been a stage for betrayal, was now frozen in a tableau of shock and despair. The front door burst open without a knock. Detective Maria Rodriguez entered first, her badge clipped to her belt, her expression grim and professional. She was followed by 6 uniformed officers who fanned out, securing the room with quiet, practiced efficiency. The air crackled with authority. "Good evening," Detective Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Her eyes swept over the scene, the wine-stained documents, the terrified faces of Sarah and Jacob Stone, and my son Kevin, who was leaning heavily on the table just to stay upright. "I'm Detective Rodriguez, Miami PD. We have a warrant for the arrest of Kevin Thompson, Sarah Thompson, and Jacob Stone on charges of conspiracy to commit grand theft, fraud, and illegal administration of a controlled substance." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world collapsing into rubble. Kevin tried to speak, to muster some defense, but the sedatives had taken their full effect. "A misunderstanding," he mumbled, his tongue thick and uncooperative. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Mom, tell him. It's a misunderstanding." I stood up from my chair, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. I looked down at the son who had so grossly underestimated me. "There is no misunderstanding, Kevin," I said, my voice resonating with 4 months of pent-up pain and fury. "For 122 days, I have known about your plan. I have documented every lie, every theft, every betrayal. The police have recordings of your calls to the loan sharks. They have copies of the documents you forged. And they have a crystal-clear recording of the confession you just screamed across this table." The color drained from his face as the full scope of my counter-operation crashed down on him. "For months?" he whispered in disbelief. "You've known since August?" "I've known since the moment you called me a demented old woman on my own patio," I replied, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. "I knew when you sold your father's watch. I knew when you hired a disgraced criminal to impersonate a lawyer. And I knew exactly what you were planning to do tonight." 2 officers moved towards Jacob Stone, who had started sweating profusely. "I'm just a notary," he blurted out, holding up his hands. "I was just hired to witness a signature. I didn't know anything about this." "Mr. Stone," Detective Rodriguez said, her voice flat and unimpressed, "you were disbarred by the Texas State Bar 3 years ago for defrauding senior citizens. You have no legal authority to act as a notary. We also have recordings of you and Mr. Thompson explicitly discussing the fraudulent nature of these documents. You have the right to remain silent." His face crumpled as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. He knew the game was up. Next, the officers turned to Sarah, who had collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. "It wasn't my idea," she cried as they gently but firmly pulled her to her feet. "It was Kevin. He made me do it. The loan sharks were going to kill us." "Ma'am, your cooperation will be noted," one of the officers said calmly as he read her rights. "But you actively participated in the attempt to drug Mrs. Thompson. Then there was only Kevin." He stumbled towards me, his face a mess of tears and snot, the sedatives turning his desperation into a pathetic, clumsy display. He reached for my hands. "Mom, please," he sobbed. "I'm your son. Your only family. After Dad died. It's just us. You can't do this. We can fix this. I'll pay it all back, I swear. I swear on Dad's memory." He invoked his father's memory. The father whose legacy he had sold for a pittance. For a split second, the mother in me, the woman who had held him as a baby and kissed his scraped knees, felt a pang of a long-dead instinct to comfort him. But then I saw the truth. I saw the calculating stranger who had looked at my love and seen only a weakness to be exploited. I pulled my hands away as if his touch was toxic. My voice broke, not with weakness, but with the sheer weight of my final judgment. The son I raised, the boy Robert and I loved, died a long time ago, Kevin. He would never have been capable of this. He would never have risked my life for money. You are a stranger who has burned our family to the ground. And now you will answer for it. As the officers led him away, a broken weeping shell of a man, his last desperate pleas echoed in the hallway. Mom! Please! Detective Rodriguez remained behind. She looked at me, her professional demeanor softening for a moment. Mrs. Thompson, she said quietly, in my 20 years on the force, I have never seen a victim turn the tables on their attackers with such courage and precision. You did an incredible thing tonight. I looked around the silent dining room, at the wreckage of my family. Detective, I said, my voice weary but clear. When you discover the person you love most in the world is willing to destroy you, you find a strength you never knew you had. The months between the arrest and the trial were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and statements. The story became a local media sensation. The Miami matriarch. They called me the senior citizen who outsmarted her own son. But for me there was no glamour, only a grim sense of duty. I had to see this through to the end. The evidence was overwhelming. The video and audio recordings from my dining room were irrefutable. The financial trail Marcus had uncovered was a damning roadmap of Kevin's descent. The toxicology report confirmed that Kevin had a high dose of lorazepam in his system, the very sedative he had intended for me. The case was hermetic. The trial was scheduled for 8 months after that fateful night. Sarah, facing serious prison time, took a plea deal. Her testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence became the final brutal act of betrayal in this family tragedy. On the stand, she tearfully recounted every detail of the plot, painting Kevin as the manipulative mastermind and herself as a terrified, coerced participant. She threw my son under the bus to save herself, and I couldn't even find it in me to blame her. They were two sinking ships, tearing each other apart to stay afloat for a few more seconds. Jacob Stone, the fake lawyer, didn't even bother with the trial. Facing his second felony conviction for the exact same type of crime, his lawyer negotiated a plea. He was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of parole. Finally, it was Kevin's day in court. He stood before the judge, a man I barely recognized. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit hung off his frame. The confident, charming son I once knew was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out man with haunted eyes. His defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, due to his gambling addiction, and the duress from the loan sharks. He tried to paint Kevin as a desperate man who made a terrible mistake, not a cold-hearted criminal. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I declined to speak. My actions on December 10th had said everything I needed to say. The evidence would speak for me. The judge, a stern, gray-haired woman named Judge Eleanor Davies, was not moved by the defense's pleas for leniency. After the jury delivered their swift guilty verdict on all counts, she addressed Kevin directly. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "you have not just committed a crime against an individual. You have committed a crime against the very concept of family. You violated the most sacred trust that exists, that of a child to a parent. You looked at your mother, the woman who gave you life, and saw only an obstacle to be removed, a resource to be plundered. Your actions were not a mistake. They were a calculated series of choices, steeped in greed and a chilling lack of empathy." I sat in the front row listening to every word. This wasn't about victory anymore. There is no victory in watching your own child's life be dismantled. But there was a sense of validation. The world now saw him as I did. Therefore, the judge concluded, it is the sentence of this court that you, Kevin Thompson, be remanded to the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections for a period of 5 years. A gasp went through the courtroom. 5 years. It was a firm, substantial sentence. As the bailiffs moved forward to lead him away, Kevin's eyes found mine across the room. There was no anger in them, no defiance. Only a vast, empty despair. He knew he had lost everything, not just his freedom but his mother, his past, and any hope for the future we might have had. Many people might think that was the moment of triumph. But sitting there, watching my only son in handcuffs being led to a prison cell, I can tell you that no one truly wins in a situation like this. There are only broken hearts and shattered lives. However, this wasn't the end of my story. In fact, in a strange way, it was the beginning of my true purpose. It turns out that by saving myself, I had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would help countless others. Because of the detailed information I and my investigator, Marcus, had provided about the Austin loan sharks, including the threatening recordings, the Miami PD was able to launch a joint investigation with the Austin Police Department and the FBI. 6 months after Kevin's sentencing, they conducted a series of raids, dismantling the entire criminal organization. My personal battle for survival had resulted in a very real victory against a network that preyed on the desperate. Just like my son, my pain had a purpose I never could have foreseen. After the trial, the silence in my big Miami house became deafening. Every room held a ghost, a memory now tainted by the truth. The sunroom where I overheard the plot, the dining room that became a crime scene, Kevin's childhood bedroom. It was all a museum of a life that had been a lie. I knew I couldn't heal there, so I sold it. I sold the house, the furniture, the ghosts, everything. I packed a few boxes of things that truly mattered. Robert's books, my photo albums, my memories of a time before the darkness, and I left Miami behind. I moved to a quiet coastal town in North Carolina, a place of peaceful waves and salty air. I bought a small cottage with a porch overlooking the ocean, and for the first time in a long time, I began to breathe again. With the legal battles over, my focus shifted to the Robert Thompson Legacy Trust. The scholarship program for architecture students was already up and running, a beautiful tribute to my husband, but I knew it had to be more. My experience had opened my eyes to a silent epidemic, the financial exploitation of seniors by their own families. I used a significant portion of my own funds, the part outside the trust, to expand its mission. We established a new branch of the foundation, the Phoenix Project. Its goal was simple but vital: to provide free legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to elderly individuals who were victims of family fraud and abuse. The work was heartbreaking, but it was also my salvation. I listened to stories that mirrored my own: children who forged checks, grandchildren who manipulated their way into wills, spouses who drained joint accounts. I sat with men and women who, like me, had felt alone, ashamed, and powerless. But in our shared stories, we found strength. We helped them fight back. We connected them with lawyers like David, investigators like Marcus, and compassionate detectives like Maria Rodriguez. In helping them rebuild their lives, I was rebuilding my own. My pain had been transformed into a shield for others. I received letters from Kevin, sent from the state prison. Dozens of them. They started arriving once a month, his familiar handwriting on the envelopes. I never opened a single one. I placed them unopened into a simple wooden box. Forgiveness might be a virtue, but trust, once annihilated, can never be fully restored. His actions had consequences, and my silence was one of them. In a support group for people who had experienced profound family betrayal, I met a man named Frank. He was a retired history professor, a kind man with gentle eyes who had a story of his own, a daughter who had tried to have him committed to a facility to sell off his family farm. We didn't fall into a whirlwind romance. We fell into something far more precious: a deep, quiet understanding. We would take long walks on the beach, talking for hours not just about our pain, but about books, politics, and the simple beauty of a sunset over the water. We found solace not in forgetting the past, but in finding someone who understood its scars. 2 years have passed since that night in the dining room. I've learned the most difficult lesson of all. Family is not an obligation defined by blood. It is a privilege earned through loyalty, respect, and love. My son lost that privilege. In its place, I have built a new family. A family of fellow survivors, of dedicated professionals, of friends like Eleanor, and of a kind man who knows what it's like to walk through fire and come out the other side. I took the box of Kevin's unopened letters down from the shelf a few weeks ago. I didn't read them. I took them out to the beach at dusk, and I burned them in a small, safe fire pit. As I watched the smoke curl up into the twilight sky, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt peace. I was finally letting go of the ghost of the son I thought I had, and embracing the life I had built for myself. My life is not what I thought it would be. It's better. It has a purpose forged in pain, a strength born from betrayal, and a peace that comes from knowing I survived the worst and used it to create something good. I turned my greatest tragedy into my most profound triumph. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's important that we speak our truths. Have you ever had to find strength in a moment of unimaginable betrayal? I would be honored to read your story in the comments below. You are not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of survival, strength, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit.